We're starting off episode 26 in the role of a stranded traveler who just stumbled across the mystery shack and we're being greeted by Stan trying to tell us some tales, to sell us some garbage, valuable merchandise. So basically just normal Stan behavior. As you might have already guessed, this is one of those horror episodes, and to really get that point across, they throw in an eldritch abomination, just for good measure. And if you thought Stan was robbing people with how the stuff from the gift shop was priced, then you might need to think again. Because the first thing he tries to sell us is a severed hand for $500. And I might not know what those are going for on the black market right now, but the one thing I do know is that I could get at least one of them for free. Well, after a not so subtle Lord of the Rings reference, we jump into the first short story called Hands Off. With the Pines walking around some sort of flea market where Lazy Susan sells baby parts, and I'm pretty sure those are just cheap knockoffs. They don't look like real baby parts to me. While Mabel is saying her last lines in this scene with the bobbleheads, she sounds like she's talking to a desk fan for some reason.
They agree with everything I say.
Can't rule out that it's just an artifact from my DVD, but I thought I'd just mention it. We're following this up with another interesting magazine cover. This time we got the magazine Crone Alone, Witches Be Tripping, which you might be able to consider foreshadowing for later on, though it's very vague. What I can say with 100% certainty though is that this old bag did not understand the assignment, because she refuses to sell any of the watches to Stan. She refuses to sell at a flea market, where you put up shop to sell something. Well, that doesn't really matter anyways, because Stan just stole one of them, and apparently he has the same abilities as Pacifica's father, because he can also just let a watch disappear and then reappear whenever he wants to. When they walk away from the stand, Agent Powers makes a short appearance in the background, and they also start to make fun of Dipper because he suggests that the witch just put a curse on Stan, and he's right. But credit where credit is due, at least they kept the watch on the right arm. I mean, it's the left arm, but it's the right one by being the left arm. Damn it, it's the correct arm. In the wider shot of the kitchen, you can also see that they have a wooden board standing up on a shelf with my favorite inspirational quote on it. Okay, so the way it's written, it's more or less pronounced like Hirsch, so it's most likely just a reference to the creator of the show. After Stan decides that the best course of action, instead of apologizing, would be for Mabel to make him some new hands, and thanking her by nearly ripping half a scalp off, he also sticks one of his new fingers into the side of his head. At least that's what it looks like at first, because when I watched back the scene, I noticed that the fork wasn't even touching his face. Apparently the curse seems to have made him slightly magnetic. Well, in the next scene, Stan is taking his new hands for a spin in the bowling alley, where the other agent, Agent Trigger, also makes an appearance, as well as Nate, one of Wendy's friends. A funny little detail that I noticed is that before Stan decides to endanger everyone in the room, you can see the twins sitting in the background, and Mabel is just grinning, has a positive outlook on the whole thing, and Dipper already seems apprehensive and to know that something has to go wrong. And of course, that's for good reason. The ball that Tyler was carrying in his bag also seems to have a mind of its own, or at least defy gravity, because it just jumps out of the bag after it fell down without anyone interacting with it again. It's pretty obvious that the new hands aren't working that well for Stan, so they decide to go to the Hand Witch's lair. According to the flea market pamphlet that Mabel read through, the lair is called Horrible Hand Witch Lair, and it's located on the Hand Witch Mountain. Wow. This scene with the hands crawling along the ceiling really reminded me of one of those cave exploration videos where the cave is just filled with daddy long legs hanging from the walls and ceiling. Only that this is probably 100 times more horrifying. I get the whole the hands are trying to restrain them or cut their hair part, but I'm certain that those hands are touching Stan's no-no square. After they call her out for basically inventing all the stuff about Stan needing to kiss her to get his hands back, and Stan also calling her face a mess, ouch. She admits to lying about that, saying that she just tried to find a date that way, which is a giant red flag in itself. Naturally, the twins take pity on her and decide to help her by renovating the cave. So we're ending the first story on a good note. Stan gets his hands back, and the witch even finds a date. Now on to the next story, which is about waddles called Awakenings. We're starting off the story with Dipper trying to solve a ridiculously hard Rubik's Cube, or Rubik's Ball, I suppose. And they advertise two more puzzles on the packaging itself, which are the Stressorect and Annoyangle. Oh yeah, they already sound like a lot of fun. Weirdly, they wrote from the maters off instead of from the makers. And they also didn't capitalize the S in Stressorect, in contrast to them capitalizing the A of Annoyangle. And at first I wrote them down as animation errors, but now thinking about it, they just seem too obvious for the animation team to miss them. So maybe they are intended to make the packaging seem like it's from a cheap product. After Dipper tries to solve the water hexahedron for a few seconds, he comes to the only logical conclusion. No, it's not trying for longer, it's using a brain power enhancing fungus. Because you all know how the saying goes, fungus in your brain makes your puzzle skills go insane. I think there was also a video game and a show about that, but that's beside the point. You of course gets the idea for the fungus from the journal, and I would have loved to show you that page and go over it through the details, but it doesn't exist in the physical journal. But in this case, you could argue that it's not an error, but a confirmation. That Stan really is making all of this up, like he said before starting the story. So the inevitable happens, and Waddles gains super intelligence by eating the mushroom goo, and now sounds like Neil deGrasse Tyson. He also now drives around in this little cart he built that he somehow managed to drive up the stairs, or he might have solely used stuff that was already in the attic. Of course, he also managed to solve the Rubik's Ball, which even besides his high intelligence seems like an achievement in itself, considering he doesn't even have fingers. Somehow Waddles also managed to invisibly weaponize the cart that he's riding, because he shoots some rockets at the goat. Because it gnaws on his cart, and he launches rockets from the right side of it. But we saw that right side earlier when he was turned to the twins, so he somehow managed to hide that rocket launcher. Now Waddles and Dipper decide to go and invent some stuff, which, by the way, Mabel isn't too thrilled about. And on their way, they meet Grenda, who for some reason is just hanging around on the parking lot flying her kite, calling Waddles an affront against nature when she first sees him. And this is very likely the only time you're going to hear me say this, but this time I actually agree with Grenda. After a bit more sulking from Mabel, we finally get to see Waddles' magnum opus, an intelligence-enhancing machine powered by potatoes? Of course, we can't have Waddles just leave in the pursuit of knowledge, so he decides to stay with Mabel and revert back to a normal pig. And we're ending off the short story with what you could consider an animation error, when Waddles says that he wants to use his last 8 seconds of consciousness to talk to Dipper, but the talk he then proceeds to have is longer than 8 seconds. Before we get into the last short story, we get another ad break with Stan, who tries to sell us some spooky movies by basically suggesting that you could use these movies to get a girl to snuggle up next to you, and then he trails off into saying that your life would be falling apart because you have to raise a kid, and so on and so forth. And all this seems like he's speaking from experience, but as far as we know, he doesn't have a kid, so it's probably just a lie he tells to sell the tape. Hey ho, editing Niceless here, chiming in for a second. I just noticed that the eye in the background in the picture has a reflection of a triangle with visible seams on it, which of course is a reference to Bill, though this time I suppose the eye isn't on the triangle, but the triangle is inside the eye? Well, moving on from Stan's secret child to the third and last short story, which is called Clay Day. We start off with Mabel watching a cartoon that seems rather violent and also pretty creepy. And right off the bat we learn that Mabel may or may not have a fear of claymation, though I'm not certain because this still might all be made up by Stan. Though in this case it's not called claymation, it's called fright-o-motion, which you could consider foreshadowing for later. The movie that Stan showed Mabel was filmed in Gravity Falls, and considering Stan didn't grow up there, so his parents probably didn't buy the movie, it was probably acquired by the author who owned the shack before Stan moved in. To rid Mabel of a fear, they decide to visit the director of the movie, who also lives in Gravity Falls, and they find out that he used black magic to make the clay monsters from the movie come to life. Shocker, I know. Oh, they also threw in a little King Kong reference. Or at least I think it's supposed to be King Kong. When the director explains how the monsters went berserk because they basically lost their jobs to CGI, we are shown this scene where the director looks up to one of the monsters, most likely the Cyclops, judging by the size of the shadow, but he's already tied up, which is weird considering that he's just telling us how the monsters enslaved him, and this scene seems to show the moment that happened. So there isn't really a reason for him to already be tied up if this is the moment where they captured him. The director then ends his backstory by telling the group that they will also now be turned into clay monsters. Mabel of course can't let that happen, and after she realizes that she can just reshape the clay into something more to her liking, and unnecessarily vaulting over the handrail, she turns the Cyclops into the weird cartoon stuff from the beginning of the short story and lets it smash the other clay monsters to smithereens. For some reason Sue still turned to clay though, and Stan brutally murders him. And the ending to the short story is just as disturbing as the ending to the overall episode, because Stan literally kidnaps us and turns us into an attraction. Though considering how cheap everything else in the gift shop is, it's a wonder that hitting the glass like this didn't break it. And so we have arrived at the end of another episode of Mysteries of Gravity Falls. I hope you enjoyed this one. I also hope that you have an amazing rest of your day, and to see you in the next episode. Until then, see ya!